everyone. This is Dr. Angela Byrd-Wright, Division Equity Leader for Hampton Schools, and I'm excited to be with you as we continue our journey in phase 2 in regards to cultural competence with learning session number 2, operationalizing cultural competence and culturally proficient spaces. As you recall from our first learning session in this phase, our purpose is really to clearly and explicitly identify the connections between social emotional learning and equity, as well as define cultural competence and culturally proficient spaces. And in so doing, in our work is to really translate and transform our understandings from phase 1, where we were developing that common language and understanding of cultural competence and its constructs and key understandings as leverage points to help inform the basis and shared commitment of the intentional connections between social emotional learning and with equity as well. So in this learning session, as always, we have participant action. So we will define and own cultural competence, as well as understand the design of culturally proficient spaces and engage in community building circles as we unpack cultural competence and culturally proficient spaces. As always, we have a reflection guide. So if you select that, it'll make a forced copy for you. And in so doing, you'll be landing right here where you'll see our reflection guide as we'll go through each of our activities for today. I do highly suggest while watching this particular video that you do this with a thinking partner or a small group. So gather your administrative team together. This will be a great time to do some team building as you delve into this work, or to have a thinking partner, someone maybe if you want to watch this over Zoom together and then be able to engage in quite a few of the activities that will be presented in this session. So as always, we want to just make sure we have that same shared commitment to Brave Space to really acknowledge authentically our goals for a team and working together, being an intentional community of learners. We're growing through our interaction, having a constructive space to share, to disagree, and to work together, that comfortable place to be uncomfortable. And in order for us to create this space, listening with intentionality, affirming others, being honest and thoughtful in our thoughts and responses, being reflective, and of course, you know I love it, staying engaged, understanding that your truth may vary from someone else's, but understanding that what you learn here leaves here with you. So taking what you've learned, being able to apply it, but what you say here stays here safely with us. So with that being said, making the connection between learning session 1 to learning session 2. So here are your 2 questions just to check in and connect. There's a timer in the presentation that you can select at the top right. It's a 5-minute timer just to give you some time to articulate your thoughts with a thinking partner or your small group, or if you're on your own to write your thoughts or type your notes into your reflection guide. So here are your 2 questions. How do equity-focused SEL practices impact school climate and contribute to community well-being and thriving? And how, not what, but how are you doing everything you can to move your students and the adults with whom you work and serve closer to opportunity? As you recall from our learning session, the first one in this phase, I co-presented along with Heather Peterson, and we really leaned in heavily into the work that we're doing in regards to that connection or that perpendicular or that cross-sectional relationship between social emotional learning and equity. It's not a parallel street, but really working and having those multiple intersections when we think about those equity-focused competencies, as well as the CASEL competencies. For example, self-management, self-awareness, reflection, and the like. So when we think through that lens, how can equity-focused SEL practices impact our culture, our climate, and what is it? How are you doing everything you can to move your students and adults with whom you work closer to opportunity? So look at the top right of your screen, click that timer for a moment, and that'll give you time to reflect. This will be a good time to also pause the video. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had the opportunity to really check in and think about those connections between your self-paced work from learning session 1 of this phase and discussing those opportunities and responses to the given questions, because you were going to have an opportunity to circle back to really think through this lens with the essential question that you see presented here. So what is your role? So think about the impact that you have as an educator in creating spaces. Notice we didn't say classrooms or schools, but creating the space around you where students and the adults with whom you support or serve can bring their full selves. So that's the job of today, to be able to answer that question by the time that we are finished today, but it's going to be an ongoing process. Again, applying that critical consciousness and self-awareness that we've learned from previous sessions together. So here's the first activity I'd like you to engage in, and you'll also see it referenced here on your reflection guide. So we're down here. You had the opportunity to respond from the previous activity. And so now we're talking about tools for trust. So create an image on an index card, piece of paper that represents trust. And then once you've done that, I want you to spread the deck. So if you're using, an index card, then it kind of makes a quick little deck of cards, and put that image side up. And then each person in your small group is to choose one image that you feel represents a crucial ingredient for building a relationship of trust. You'll use 1 minute to record your own thoughts on your reflection guide, and then use the next 4 minutes to share out how your images represent trust. So you'll look now bottom right of your screen, and you're going to see an icon there for a 5-minute timer, 6-minute timer. So use that information, use that time wisely now to create that image, then record your thoughts, and then share out how your images represent trust. This will be a good time now to pause the video. Welcome back, everyone. So you might be wondering, well, why did we do that activity? And why are we even starting with trust to begin with? Because trust is the foundation upon which relationships are built. And so when we think about phase 2 and learning session 1, just a reminder, we started that conversation about cultural competency. And cultural competency really means having an awareness of one's own cultural identity and views about differences, the ability to learn and build on varying cultural and community norms of students and their families. It's also the ability to understand the within-group differences that make us unique, students unique, those of which you serve unique, while also celebrating the between-group variations that make our country, our spaces, a tapestry. So if you really look there to the right with that culture wheel, our culture is made of, it's the stuff within us. We talked about that even from phase 1, where we unpacked culture, ethnicity, race, and what that really means. And that's the stuff that makes us who we are. So when we think about the culture wheel, the knowledge and stories obtained generationally, language, common language, traditions, rituals, tools, the objects, our greater community of whom we serve, and then connecting that, because culture really and strongly influences the attitudes, our values, and the behaviors that students and teachers bring into the instructional process, making culturally responsive educators necessary for equitable achievement of today's increasingly diverse student population. So as we even draw back, we've drawn back to our equity model, but also to the strategic plan. So in our schools, cultural competency also encompasses an understanding and appreciation of diversity, making a conscious effort to avoid judgment based on biases, stereotypes, or lack of accurate information. So then if relationships are built on trust, then trust is really grounded or secured by mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. When we talk about mirrors, that's an environment that reflects one's culture and helps to build one's identity. Windows are those opportunities that offer a view into someone else's lived experience. And then sliding glass doors, multiple entry and exit points that encourage reflection and action steps and inspire a change in perspective. But to do that well, we have to have that secured foundation of authenticity and trust. So think back to our commitment to brave space. We've been laying and planting those seeds all this time during our learning sessions together to build up to that relationship of trust. So within each of these mirrors, windows, sliding glass doors, we can see ourselves. That's that identity piece, and others. That's that empathy, that understanding. And it's through our shared humanity that we can begin to frame and to derive deeper meaning and authenticity through ourselves and the relationships that we build. So now I'm going to give you another opportunity with the next activity here. And this is a reflect and connect in regards to identity. So psychologist Dr. John Amici discusses the connections between concepts of identity and the creation of a safe learning environment and the potential for student achievement. So think about those connections between organizational effectiveness. We talked about that in phase 1, parts 4A and 4B, and how that impacts us as a whole. And again, going back to trust. So as you watch, note anything that stands out to you that resonates with you about the connection between safe space, nurturing student identity and voice, and learning. You'll be recording your thoughts again on your reflection guide. You'll see that here. So you'll be filling in that area here on your reflection guide to the left of that table. So let's give it a go and watch the video, and then I'll meet you back on the other side.
Identity is not just self-revelation. It's not just something you come to know about yourself. It's also in part made up of how other people see you and how you see yourself in other people. They call this a very old-fashioned concept in psychology called the looking glass self, the mirror self, the idea that your identity is made up in part by how other people see you.
I remember as a youngster, I arrived at that school at age 11, and I remember thinking I knew what I was all about. I was a fat kid. I enjoyed pie and cake. I knew this about myself. I also knew that I enjoyed books. I mean, I devoured books in the same way I devoured cake, actually. I just loved to read. The library was my favorite place. The smell of it alone was like sanctuary. And mostly because the only place you know you're never going to run into other students is in the library. And I remember wishing I could be invisible as I walked through the halls because I was massive, fat, and different. And people looked, and they pointed, and they laughed. And if I walked around the corner too fast and they came towards me, it wasn't laughter, but fear, terror that I would see in their face. And that has an impact on you when you're 11 or 12. I remember being assigned a book to read. And it was the first time I read a book, and in its pages, I saw me. I was assigned this book to read over the course of 2 weeks, and I got the book in class just before lunchtime. And by the end of lunchtime, I was like a third of the way through. Through the various parts of the day, I managed to steal pages and move forward. And on the bus on the way home, I finished it. And I got in, and I waited around because my mother, single mom, wasn't home when I got home, mostly, ever. And I waited around, and I sat on the landing and waited to hear her keys at the door. And I walked up to her with this book, and I said, Mom, am I a monster? The book was The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And it was the first time, if you've read that book, it has this, the Hunchback is a strange reaction to him from the people around. It's not just fear, it's ridicule and fear, laughter and terror. And that's what I saw every day. People pointing. Even as I walk around now, I was upstairs, and I'm sure it was none of you guys, earlier on today. And the family walked in to go to the lift, and I walked out of the lift to go to the lunch place. And as I walked past, I knew that if I turned around after about 3 steps, I would see it. And I turned around, and there's a mother grabbing a kid's. Not the face of, oh, amazing. No, just like, oh, like a pod had just popped down and an alien had popped out.
A lot of people think we need a safe environment because it is just about this warm and fuzzy experience that young people are supposed to have in education. And it's not really about that. We need a challenging but safe environment because there is a very narrow strata, a very narrow bandwidth where young people can be challenged and high achieve emotionally. And when you're in that sweet spot, amazing things can happen. And when you're outside of it, there's very little chance of high achievement. And what this does, when people are in environments that don't feel safe, that don't feel supportive, they end up coming to school dressing themselves almost in a bodysuit, in a U-suit that is a construction designed to help them blend in and fit, pass. Whatever identity item that we're talking about, it allows them to pass through and at least be invisible, if not outstanding. The problem is that anybody knows who has to dress up in a way that makes them uncomfortable. And a lot of people do this, you know, a lot of teachers and principals will do this too, though. They have to code switch. They have to come to school with a different set of behaviors. And everybody knows the relief that you feel when you come home at night. And it's almost like you unzip that suit and you can breathe again. You can finally take that big breath and relax. But you also know that you have to be an amazingly high functioning person to be able to manage your day with that kind of suffocating suit on. And kids don't have that capacity. So they come to school wearing this suit that allows them to fit and pass. And you're asking them to do these really high level thinking and cognitive tasks in learning. And they can't do it because A, they have no authentic connection. They're disconnected from the world of the school by this suit that protects them, they hope. And they're also suffocated by it. They're just not going to risk unzipping and being seen for the first time as a person in a space where they think there's any chance, any risk to themselves or their identity or their person. And so it's very true that in the early stages of interventions, that it's a really ideal situation people have to create. Teachers have to create this emotional space where it's safe but challenging, where people can be themselves, where people can take chances and fail, where people can tell stories about them and reveal things about themselves without risk of derision, without fear of being marginalized. Without safety, there is nothing. There is no learning.
It's a very powerful video there. And so with this information, it'll be important to now think back to what he just stated, that last few sentences or two, and that is, we have to create this emotional space where it's safe but challenging, where people can be themselves, where people can take chances and fail, a space where people can tell stories and reveal things about themselves without risk of derision or fear of being marginalized. Without safety, there is nothing, there is no learning. So take a moment, you see there's a timer there, just to think through that particular statement, because that's going to launch us into our conversation in regard to culturally proficient spaces. This will be a great time now to pause the video. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had the opportunity to really check in and connect with this particular video, as well as with the statement that's been provided here. We're going to launch right into now the key understanding and construct about culturally proficient spaces. So culturally proficient spaces are those where all students, educators, and families feel supported and are extended a sense of belonging regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, identity, learning preferences, socioeconomic status, or education. So a safe place where anyone, both teachers, students, the adults in which we work, truly have an opportunity to be and have a sense of belonging, creating those spaces. And it's incumbent upon us as leaders to ensure that that happens wherever we may be. And so as you think through the ethos and the social cultural third space, when our conceptive mechanisms, confirm that our surroundings are physically, socially, and intellectually safe. If you recall from our last phase, one, we talked about really the amygdala and those different items that really work within our brain, we're hardwired for, that try to keep us safe or within our comfort zone. But we also have to understand that when we are creating that space where folks are affirmed, where they can speak their truth, then we can go into a relaxed state of alertness and become primed for learning. So as we continue, some items just to keep in mind when we think about creating that ethos, that situation or that learning space, and a space of authenticity, we want to think about routines, rituals, agency, voice. And when we talk about agency and voice, really dealing with those social structures and that academic language that sets the tone in a classroom. So when we talk about routines, they're a way to make space for important and affirming and communal activities that create those social bonds or social cultural bonds among students and adults. Rituals, though, tap into the sensory responses, that sound, the sight, the smell, and the feelings of ceremony, that belongingness, and reinforces those elements of the academic mindset of I belong, I can do this, I can get with it, I know what's going on. And then we talk about agency and voice. That really allows us to process, to connect, and expand our thinking through social talk structures, because we know students love to talk. So structures that are more participatory and interactive, that include motion, movement, song, and then academic talk structures that are focused on giving that language, that academic language about learning and thinking. Okay, so that's when we talk about agency and voice and establishing that safe space through routines and rituals. So now you're going to have the opportunity, and that's why I said it was really important to be with a thinking partner, or at least a small group or your administrative team when watching this particular video. And that is our role, again, going back to the essential question about activation. So our role now to create spaces where students can, and the adults of whom we support, can bring their full selves, we want to give that opportunity to engage in what's called community building circles. And why is that important? We're going to simulate now what it can look like to create culturally proficient spaces where adults and students receive what they need to develop throughout and really bring their full learning through social, emotional, civic potential. And this is achieved by disrupting what we call that deficit focus. And if you can recall, the 4 horsemen of that deficit mindset and those narratives that are associated with often marginalized groups. So I want to give you the opportunity in your reflection guide. You have a link to activity number 2, community building circles. Select one of the activities that's been provided here, and then all of the check-in exercises and the activity for that particular learning circle topic. So you have 3 to choose from: building community, building trust, and the other one is partnership and respect. So keeping those in mind, you're going to select a facilitator in that small group. There, you're going to engage in the check-in exercise and then engage in the activity. And you can use items from around your office. So that could be Post-it notes, index cards, or just a sheet of paper, colored pencils, a marker, ink pen, or pencil to engage in these exercises. So really risk-free, cheap, to do, but to engage in these activities. So select one. And when you get going, you may decide with your administrative team and you're watching and say, you know what, I think we're going to do another one of these. And then even considering using some of these actually for team building exercises as you think through to even gather your staff together as well. When we think about creating that circle of really building trust and community. So at this point, it'll be a good time to pause the video, take about 10, 12 minutes to engage in at least one of these activities. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to begin to wrap up for today. As you recall, this particular phase, cultural competence, was divided into two distinct learning experiences that allowed us to begin that conversation about translating and transforming our understandings from phase one with that development of a common language to that understanding and formulating those intentional connections between social emotional learning and equity. And so at this time, prior to your next session, we want you to engage in your self-paced work. So you have phase 2 learning session 2, the self-paced work. You can select the link directly in the presentation that will route you to that particular exercise. So, and then you'll fill out your self-paced work, which should take about 20 to 30 minutes to do. You'll also notice in the Google Classroom, so you're always going to go to your classwork, you'll scroll down, you'll find division school level leadership learning sessions. So you'll notice that will be loaded in here for you. Similar to our other sessions, you'll have the description, the participant action, the driver, and then the Google Slides that are attached, and then the self-paced work is also here. Any other self-paced work that you did not have the opportunity to complete, please note they're all attached to each of the learning sessions, as you can see fulfilled here. And then this recording will be found under your division school leadership learning session recordings under the phase acronym. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And as always, thank you so much for your time, commitment, and energy. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.